In a strong show of force, just 2 days before President Trump's high-stakes meeting with Xi Jinping, the U.S. and Japan assert their military alliance in front of 6,000 American troops in Yokosuka, and the president signs yet another agreement to break China's monopoly on rare earth resources. NTD's Mari Otsu brings us the latest from Tokyo.
Born out of the ashes of a terrible war, our bond has grown over 8 decades into the beautiful friendship that we have. It's a foundation of peace and security in the Pacific.
Aboard the USS George Washington in Yokosuka, President Trump and Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi declare a golden age for their alliance.
This woman is a winner. So now I have a really great respect for the new and incredible Prime Minister. And I have to say this, the first female Prime Minister in the history of Japan.
Takaichi vows to take what she calls the world's greatest alliance to even greater heights.
We are facing an unprecedented severe security environment. Peace cannot be preserved by words alone, only when there is an unwavering determination and action.
Takaichi has long fought to raise Japan's defense budget and rewrite its pacifist constitution, a stance that's in alignment with President Trump's peace through strength posture.
No enemy will ever even dream of threatening America's Navy. And if they do, the American sailor stands ready to crush them and sink them and wreck them and blast them into oblivion, right?
Japan is committed to fundamentally reinforce its defense capabilities, and Japan is ready to contribute even more proactively to peace and stability of the region.
And in a move that puts steel behind that shared vision, President Trump announces the first U.S. missiles for Japan's F-45s land this week ahead of schedule.
I just want to tell Madam Prime Minister, they've been waiting for those missiles, and we got them here right away.
He also announces plans for Toyota to invest over $10 billion in the U.S.
So that's Toyota, so go out and buy a Toyota.
This comes as President Trump and Takaichi sign a rare earths framework, with both nations seeking to reduce China's monopoly in the sector, a resource that Beijing has weaponized in trade wars. Meanwhile, in soft diplomacy, Prime Minister Takaichi gifts 250 flowering cherry trees to Washington, D.C. in celebration of America's 250th birthday. And for President Trump personally, a golf bag signed by major winner Hideki Matsuyama, plus the putter of Shinzo Abe, the late Prime Minister and President Trump's close ally, which Abe used during President Trump's Japan visit. On Wednesday, President Trump jets off for South Korea, where he'll be making remarks at APEC and speaking with South Korea's president. And then on Thursday, we have that highly anticipated meeting between President Trump and CCP leader Xi Jinping. Reporting from Tokyo, Mari Otsu, NTD News.
President Trump met with business leaders in Japan today. Around 20 companies from Japan and the United States are exploring projects under Tokyo's pledge to invest $490 billion in America. Here's Trump and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on giving updates to the deals made during the trip.
It's going to be contributing $10 billion building auto plants throughout the United States. And they are doing it, I think, because of the November 5th election and because of the tariffs. And I was just authorized to make that statement. And we have another company that's going to be contributing at least $10 billion, and I'll give you that name later. We'll keep it a little. They wanted to do it very quietly, and that's okay with me. It could be quiet or not quiet. It's still about, I think, $18 billion. So we're very close to that.
Now you're at 518. Now you're at 518.
If you think about it. So thank you all very much. Great honor. You're great business people, my friends. Almost all of you are friends.
These deals are driven by the Japanese Strategic Investment Initiative, which was created by your tariff policy and by your historic trade agreement with Japan. So that was the underlying reason that we were able to get all these deals done today. So the commitments ensure the economic and national security of the United States of America. We're going to be developing energy. We're going to be developing nuclear, semiconductors, and strengthening the entire domestic supply chain.
Big names like SoftBank, Mitsubishi Electric, and Hitachi are among those expressing interest in fields from energy and AI infrastructure to critical minerals. Westinghouse and GE Vernova are weighing nuclear and power projects worth up to $100 billion, with major Japanese partners potentially involved. Other companies, including Panasonic, Carrier, Murata, TDK and Fujikura could join in building the next wave of U.S.-Japan industrial cooperation. Here's the president speaking at a reception with Japanese and U.S. business leaders at the U.S. Embassy.
In so many countries, they invest in the United States, but we've never had anything quite like what's happening. And I think it's going to get better. I can say it now. So we have over $17 trillion of investment in 8 months. And I think by the time we go to the 12-month period, we'll have over $20 or $21 trillion invested or to be invested, very importantly. I mean, the money's coming in, and a lot of it's commitments that are incredible. Tim Cook is doing, I think, like $600 or $650 billion, right? Think of it. You've done more than the entire group here. I'll be meeting with President Xi the day after tomorrow. I'm going to a wonderful place where I think a lot of you may be going. Xi, as you probably heard, I'd be surprised if anybody didn't hear. That's a big meeting, and I think it's going to work out very well, actually. I think it's going to be great for everybody.
Trump also highlighted fast-track approvals and what he described as record regulation cuts, allowing energy and manufacturing projects to move from proposal to construction much more quickly. He cited new nuclear, oil, and gas developments, rapid growth in AI and chip production, and a national push to restore America as a manufacturing and energy powerhouse. The president called the U.S.-Japan partnership a cornerstone of mutual prosperity and Pacific security.
Coming in, and we have a lot more money coming in. And again, I mentioned SoftBank, but JERA, JCB, Toyota, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, Honda, they're all coming into the United States. We have a lot of car plants opening up because of tariffs. They don't want to pay tariffs, and they come and frankly, Japan is sponsoring many of them because that way you don't have to pay the tariffs. Without the tariffs, I mean, tariffs are about national security, and we're making a lot of money.
Trump vowed there would be shocking numbers when the promised car plants start opening up. The president went on to discuss prices, saying energy prices, gasoline prices, and food prices are down. Trump says an exception is beef, which he promised to get under control. Joining us now for his insight on the signing of the U.S.-Japan agreement is Grant Newsroom, retired U.S. Marine colonel, former U.S. diplomat, senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, and author of When China Attacks. So, Colonel, always great to have you on the show. Can I ask you first, Trump made an offer of help to Japan in the strongest of terms during his meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi. And he said, quote, I just want to let you know anytime you have any questions, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan will be there. And Trump also said, we are an ally at the strongest level. So, Colonel, what do you make of this gesture?
Well, it was a good one. Whoever told him to say it, I think gave him some good advice. He may have thought it up on his own, but it's what the Japanese want to hear. It's one of the fundamental issues when the Japanese think about their circumstances is how are they going to protect themselves? Where does their defense come from? And they know that the U.S. is the one that provides it ultimately, and particularly when you have this aggressive, assertive, expansionist People's Republic of China, which is just across the water from Japan, and the Chinese want to teach the Japanese a lesson, want to dominate them, take their territory. So the Japanese have always been looking as to where their protection is going to come from, and that is the basis of the U.S.-Japan defense relationship. So when Mr. Trump makes a statement like this, it's a general statement, of course, but it is very well received by the Japanese, and they take that as a renewed sign of commitment on the part of the Americans. So one really can't overstate the importance of that very short statement that Mr. Trump made.
So you mentioned China's influence in the region. So in that context, the two leaders, Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister, they signed a deal on trade with the aim of helping both countries strengthen economic security. So what do you think are the biggest benefits of this trade deal with Japan?
Well, I think the economic ties into the security. And Japan has got a very good hand to play because they have been either the number one or number two investor in the United States for many years. And the Japanese investment, it actually provides for a few 100,000 at least good manufacturing jobs. So this is serious investment throughout the US economy in places where it has really needed help. So Japan has been doing this for a long time, and now it's promised to do even more. And that works to Japan's benefit, it works to the United States' benefit, and it does tend to strengthen the fundamental relationship between the two countries. And so instead of complaining and whining about tariffs, the Japanese said, well, what is it we need to do? What is it the Americans are after? And they've done their best to try to satisfy that. They haven't handed over a blank check, but they have been very cooperative because they know it is in their interest to do this. And they have really come through on this. And it's been a very good visit so far by Mr. Trump.
And Colonel, you and I, we have talked about China's limiting rare earth exports on this program before. Can you also talk about the significance of Trump recently signing minerals deals with Australia and Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and now Japan? Why these countries specifically?
Well, one that they have, either they have rare earths, they know how to process them, or they have some specific technology for producing things with rare earths. For example, the Japanese make very high-end magnets. And if you get these to scale, that would go a long way to meeting the American shortfall. The Chinese have a chokehold over the United States with their rare earth dominance. And Mr. Trump and the administration are trying to get out of that. And that's why they're signing these deals with the Australians, with the Japanese, Thailand, Malaysia, and others. And this is leading quietly, and nobody will quite say it, really to the development of a free world rare earth sort of market. And that's compared to the unfree world market, of course, which the Chinese dominate. So that is where we're headed. And these are some good initial steps, and particularly the Australia-Japan deals. The Thailand and Malaysia, they're good on paper, and there is some substance to them, but you can expect the Chinese to try to undercut those very quickly. And the Chinese do have pretty good, strong involvement in the Malaysian and Thailand rare earth market. But as a move, there's a lot of foresight involved here and moving quickly. The administration, I think, believes that if it goes hard, that it can break that Chinese chokehold within maybe a year or so. That may be optimistic, but maybe not. The Americans do things faster than most people predict sometimes.
So, Colonel, this chokehold that China has on rare earths, do you think these initial steps that are taken by the U.S., how do you feel about whether it's going to be effective in reducing that chokehold?
Well, I think it's going to work. I'm optimistic about it. One should remember that in 2010 or so, the Chinese cut off rare earth exports to Japan, and that was a shot across the bow. And the Japanese took that warning to heart, and they set about becoming less dependent on China for rare earths. They reduced their dependency to somewhere around 60%. They could go lower if they made an effort. The U.S., we're about 80, 90% dependent on China. So it shows what can be done. And I think it can go pretty quickly if the will is there. And I think the administration has it because they have really been hurt by the Chinese playing this card so hard. In fact, it has forced the Americans to back off from the really strict or strong steps they wanted to take to deal with the People's Republic of China. And you have the leaders of major U.S. companies in the White House saying, look, if these get cut off, we're going to have to shut down manufacturing facilities. So the administration had no chance but to back off. They want to deal with that and have some alternative. And I think that's where we're headed.
So generally speaking, how important is it for the U.S. to have a strong alliance with Japan in order to counter the CCP, whether economically or any other aspect?
Well, it's essential. While really the U.S. elites and too much of our political class sat by and did nothing, the Chinese have developed themselves into a military and economic power that potentially could defeat us in certain circumstances. The game's not over there, but that's how bad it's gotten. So without Japan, the United States would now have a very hard time defending its position in the Asia Pacific. With and without the Americans, the Japanese would probably have no chance at all, and the Chinese would ultimately dominate them if they got lucky. So that's how bad it is. But the mutual dependence between the United States and Japan has never been more real nor more obvious. And that's the important part. I think both sides recognize this. There's a tendency on each side to take the other for granted for many years, but in recent times that has changed. And I think we've seen with that visit between President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi that both sides realize that they've got trouble on the horizon and they have to cooperate to deal with it.
Okay, Colonel, can you talk to us about the messaging here? Because President Trump has said that he thinks Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi will be one of the great prime ministers. He also said former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe spoke so well of Takaichi. It looks like Trump really made an effort here to praise her. So what is the message that this is sending ahead of the meeting between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping?
Well, it sends a message that the Americans and the Japanese are firmly aligned and that there isn't much room for the Chinese to split it, to cause trouble or friction via political warfare, subversion, or what have you. And when you see the Americans and the Japanese via their leaders getting together and getting along so well, and also announcing some real initiatives in the defense and economic area, that suggests a sort of linkage, which is hard to split. And the Chinese don't like that. And any time that, particularly when they see the Americans and the Japanese and others getting along, getting together, obviously to defend themselves, well, the Chinese don't like that. They much prefer dealing with their victims one at a time. So this is something that will cause the PRC some concern. I expect they'll be complaining about it. But nonetheless, the stronger the U.S. relationship with Japan and vice versa, that the more likely you are to have stability in the Asia-Pacific region and to be able to protect the free world's interests.
Okay, Colonel, I would just like to ask one more question, if I may. And looking ahead at that upcoming meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping, what do you think we should expect in that summit?
I think what we're going to get is a deal of sorts. It'll be a temporary deal where the Chinese agree not to go ahead with their plans to really cut off rare earth exports to the West, to the United States as well. And in exchange, the Americans are going to ease up on something. It will probably be exports of computer chips that may take off the payments that the Chinese ships have to pay when they land in or come into U.S. ports, things along those lines. But it's not going to be any fundamental concessions on either side. But I say this is just buying some time for both parties. They're saving some of their leverage for later on. I think the Americans think if they can just get another year, then they'll be in a better position. The Chinese, it's never quite certain what they think, but they have some real problems. They have become very aggressive, more than I've ever seen, and are playing their cards, particularly via the rare earth stranglehold that they've got. But beyond that, they've got some real weaknesses, and their economy cannot last without continued exports. They won't be able to get the foreign currency they need. You're not keeping people employed. And where you're a country where you have at least 600 million people living on $5 a day or less, you have got to keep the economy running. So the Chinese, I say, are putting on a brave face, and they are playing rough. But at the same time, there's a little bit of posing here. So both sides, I think, are going to reach some sort of a temporary agreement. I'm still waiting to see if there is some more concessions that come from the U.S. side that we aren't thinking about, and if there's any concession on the American support for Taiwan, that would be a strategic disaster. I don't think that's going to happen. I would note also if the Chinese agree to buy American soybeans, that should not be considered a victory, because when the Chinese take those soybeans, they put them into more value-added products that they export, so they end up making about 4 times the amount that they've actually paid for soybeans. So that is At most, it's a very short-term sort of convenience for the United States to accept that, but it should not be taken as any sign that China has changed the way it's behaved or changed its objectives, which are ultimately to dominate the free world.
Well, okay, Colonel, that should do it for today. Terrific insight as always. Really enjoy hearing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Beijing is trying to pitch itself as an alternative to what it calls U.S. protectionism. The regime signaled an expanded free trade pact with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That's ahead of a planned meeting between President Trump and Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping this week. Here's more.
China signed an upgraded free trade deal with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, on Tuesday. The 11-member bloc is China's biggest trading partner, with bilateral trade totaling $771 billion last year. Beijing is seeking to strengthen its ties with ASEAN to counter hefty import tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. Beijing's Commerce Ministry said the upgraded agreement includes sections on digital, the green economy, and other new industries. It was signed at the summit of ASEAN leaders, which Trump also attended on Sunday at the start of a trip through Asia. Talks on the upgraded deal began in November 2022 and ended in May this year, just after Trump's tariff offensive kicked off. Beijing has been seeking to position itself as a more open economy, even as it courts criticism for expanding export restrictions on rare earths and other critical minerals. The US and China extended a trade truce this weekend in Kuala Lumpur. Negotiators hashed out an agreement for Trump and Xi Jinping to decide on later this week when they meet in Seoul.
Taiwan says its relationship with the United States is stable and that there is close cooperation between the two sides. The country's foreign minister made the remarks today ahead of President Trump's upcoming meeting this week with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping.
Because our Taiwan-U.S. relations are very stable. No matter whether on security, trade and business and other areas, there is close cooperation. We're a member of APEC and have a representative to participate at the APEC summit.
Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te said today that Israel is a model for the island nation to learn from in strengthening its defenses. He cited the biblical story of David versus Goliath on the need to stand up to authoritarianism. Taiwan has been a strong backer of Israel since the 2023 Hamas-led attack on that country. Lai says Jewish people have suffered constant persecution throughout their history. He added that appeasement has never been a way to stop authoritarian governments. Lai says the concept of peace through strength is a maximum that Israel, U.S., and Taiwanese societies have had for years. The Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates by 1/4 point this week, and President Trump is in Japan now for his second stop on his Asia diplomacy tour. Joining us to discuss is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tresses Hedge Fund, international financial analyst, and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, always good to see you. Can I just ask you, how do you feel about the size of the expected cut at 1/4 percent?
Well, I think it's logical. It's what everybody expected. The Fed continues to be very aggressive in its messages about inflation when inflation is nowhere to be found. And obviously, that is hurting Americans and it's hurting families and small and medium enterprises in particular. But a 25 basis points cut is at least within expectations and part of a broader cut that is likely to happen in the next 3 meetings.
But let me ask you this. We got the inflation numbers a couple days ago, about a week. So with inflation still above target, do you think easing monetary policy makes sense?
Well, we have to remember what has caused inflation in the United States. No, you have to remember that usually people think that increasing rates is a way of controlling inflation because that would reduce money supply. However, what happened between 2022 and 2024 is that the Fed increased rates, but at the same time, the government continued to overspend deficit spending went through the roof, and inflationary pressures were the same. So what happened was that elevated rates hurt families and small and medium enterprises, while the government continued to spend like there was no tomorrow. So what is happening right now is that the inflationary pressures are coming down precisely because the government is reducing expenditure, reducing the amount of money created. However, you need to cut rates because small and medium enterprises and families have been really affected. First, by the Fed's wrong policies regarding inflation in between 21 and 23, and with the rate hikes of 24 and 23. Those elements are negative for small and medium enterprises. And basically what we need to understand is that those do not cause inflation. What causes inflation is the increase in government spending.
All right, I also wanted to talk to you about Trump's Asia trip. What would you say is the overarching objective of his 6-day visit on the trade front?
I think there are three main objectives. Objective number one is to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Japan. Japan has been selling treasuries in the past years, trying to defend the yen, unsuccessfully, to be honest. And with the new prime minister sharing a lot of economic policies and a lot of viewpoints with the Trump administration, there would be an opportunity to strengthen the ties with Japan and get Japan to go back to purchasing treasuries. No, the second one is aiming at China, is looking at the importance of building very, very strong ties with technology giants like Japan is, to continue to be a Western alliance that can look face to face to China and beat them in terms of trade, in terms of rare earths, in terms of all of those elements that seem to be creating tensions between the United States and China. So it's an important element. Japan is a big rare earth provider. And the third one is financial. No, both the United States and Japan are part of the SWIFT environment, and Japan needs the United States' strength in the financial market to reduce the pressures on long-term bond yields. So all those elements, treasuries, trade, and an alliance in everything that has to do with rare earths are elements that are significant, added to the financial part.
So Daniel, as you know, all eyes are on China because a deal with China is at the center of this tour, right? What are the stakes here? What would happen if the U.S. cannot reach a deal on tariffs and rare earths?
Well, I think that if they don't reach a deal, it's going to certainly reduce the optimism from markets regarding the economy in 2026, because it will be negative for China and it will be negative for the United States technology advancement. But I think that the situation right now is a situation in which the United States has the upper hand, precisely because of the deal reached with Japan right now. If you remember, reaching an agreement with the UK in terms of trade was absolutely critical to reach an agreement with the European Union that seemed to drag its feet. In this case, I think it's also very similar. Reach an agreement with Japan that immediately reduces the dependence on rare earths from China, reduces the dependence of some of critical elements from China, and forces the Chinese negotiators to reach a more positive deal that would ultimately be essential for both economies. China cannot go ahead without a trade deal. We have already seen how it is impossible for China to offset the US market with other markets, and at the same time, the United States thinks quite and quite rightly so that there is an opportunity to reestablish trade relationships with China from a more leveling playing field environment.
Okay, so in a sense, in a nutshell here, Daniel, are you saying that more successful negotiations with Japan, stronger cooperation will put the U.S. in a stronger position in negotiations with the upcoming meeting with China?
I think so. I think that the agreement with the Japanese Prime Minister is absolutely critical to show to China that it's not just something that the Chinese government can delay endlessly. That it creates a significant change in the balance of power in terms of the trade negotiations.
So would China be losing this card, so to speak, if the U.S. can diversify its supply chains when it comes to rare earth minerals?
That is for sure. That is absolutely clear. If China plays too aggressively the limitations on rare earths as a key element of its trade negotiations, the United States can immediately go to other suppliers and sort the situation very, very quickly. To be fairly honest, actually, in a very substantial way compared to what was perceived maybe 3 years ago. Big development there.
Okay, so before going to Japan, Trump visited other Southeast Asian countries. And one of the things that Trump talked about was trade imbalances with those countries. Can you speak to what is driving the Trump administration's focus on these trade imbalances with nations like Vietnam and Malaysia?
For example, Vietnam is well known for utilizing its borders for origin washing. No? There are a number of non-tariff barriers that are limitations for U.S. companies, particularly in automotive parts, also in soybeans, in agricultural products, in farming products, in chemicals. So it's not tariffs. A lot of the headlines that I read these days are about, there's no tariff impact. No, it's not about tariffs. It's about those significant regulatory, administrative, and taxation burdens that limit the trade with the United States, while those governments at the same time are giving a preferential treatment to China in some cases, like is the case of Japan. Of Vietnam, and therefore creating that imbalance that the Trump administration is saying. Basically, what is the imbalance? The imbalance is that the United States companies have significantly higher burdens to export to those nations, while those nations favor other political allies in a more aggressive way, and therefore they're creating this very, very significant difference in as I said before, in automotive parts, in agricultural, and also in farming products and chemicals. Chemicals very important.
So, Daniel, just one last question here. Vietnam and Malaysia pledged to buy more U.S. goods to narrow their surpluses. Can I ask you, do these purchase commitments historically work in reducing trade imbalances?
Very rarely, but I don't think that the Trump administration is looking to eliminate the trade deficit. What is looking is to eliminate or at least significantly reduce the unfair treatment of U.S. companies, which is different. We all agree that if there's a trade deficit based on the open and free cooperation between free companies, that is okay. And that benefits both nations. That benefits consumers and benefits the nations. The problem is when the trade deficit has absolutely nothing to do with the Ricardian view of trade and has everything to do with regulatory, administrative, taxation, and non-tariff barriers that shift the trading patterns to support China and hurt the U.S. That is what the U.S. administration is trying to at least reach an equilibrium in terms of not the amount of trade, but the fairness of that trade.
Well, all right, Daniel, really appreciate you giving us your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don. Always a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us today. The United States continues cracking down on drug traffickers trying to smuggle narcotics into the U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the military hit 4 boats, killing a total of 14 alleged drug traffickers. Hegseth said the Department of War carried out 3 lethal kinetic strikes on 4 vessels operated by designated terrorist organizations trafficking narcotics in the Eastern Pacific. 1 person survived the strikes. According to Hegseth, Mexican authorities assumed responsibility for coordinating his rescue. It's not clear if that person will stay in Mexican custody or be handed over to the U.S. The action marks an increase in the pace of strikes, which began in early September. It's the first time multiple strikes were announced in a single day. The U.S. has now confirmed a total of 12 strikes against drug smuggling vessels in the area of operations of Southern Command. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details on the latest confirmed strikes in the Eastern Pacific.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth confirmed that the U.S. conducted 3 strikes that struck 4 drug smuggling boats in the Eastern Pacific. U.S. Southern Command delegated search and rescue operations of 1 survivor to the Mexican authorities, suggesting that the strikes took place near the Pacific coasts of Mexico.
You've been watching what our missiles do to boats and ships and submarines. How about the submarine? This is a submarine, and you know what it was designed for? Transporting drugs.
At least 14 narco-terrorists were killed in the latest strikes. The U.S. military presence in the region is exerting pressure on the regime of Nicolás Maduro.
Faced with the Prime Minister's threat to turn Trinidad and Tobago into the aircraft carrier of the U.S. empire, against Venezuela, against South America, there is only one alternative. I have approved the precautionary measure of immediately suspending all energy agreements and everything agreed upon in this area.
Trinidad and Tobago and the United States conducted joint military exercises earlier this week, which prompted the Maduro regime to cancel all oil shipments to the neighboring nation. The Venezuelan regime of Nicolás Maduro has also accused the U.S. of conducting false flag operations inside Venezuela.
It was reported that a false flag operation was underway due to the arrest of a group of people linked to the CIA who have already provided sufficient information for us to go out to the country and the international community to denounce this new provocation that seeks to escalate the United States' aggression against Venezuela.
Nicolás Maduro is an indicted narco-terrorist, and his regime provides financial support to the 2 other dictatorships in the region, Cuba and Nicaragua, through subsidized oil shipments.
Nicolás Maduro is a brutal dictator, and I think this administration is interested in advancing democracy in Venezuela. It has been the source of a migration crisis that has led 8 million Venezuelans to flee the country. And of course, Venezuela is something of a staging ground for Chinese and Russian influence in the Western Hemisphere.
The Maduro regime is also tied to the Colombian terrorist organization known as FARC. The Maduro-led Cartel of the Suns has transferred military-grade weapons to the Colombian guerrilla group and also coordinated drug smuggling operations with them. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announced the U.S. military conducted 3 strikes against 4 suspected drug smuggling vessels in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. Joining us to discuss is retired Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, former Black Hawk helicopter pilot and battalion commander in the U.S. Army. So, Colonel, good afternoon to you. Now, the operations resulted in the deaths of 14 alleged narco-terrorists. So, to start off, what are your thoughts on the U.S. pursuing a militarized approach to combating narco-terrorism?
Hey, yeah, good afternoon. Well, first of all, people who are arguing that there's some legal challenges to this have not read our Constitution, and that's the ultimate law of the land. That's my first thought. Article 4, Section 4 says the federal government, writ large, has the responsibility to protect the states from foreign invasion. And in this case, this is clearly an invasion, because if you were to take a formal army in uniform and have them cross our border and kill over 400,000 Americans, what else would you call that? That is clearly an invasion. So what Trump is trying to do here is a good action, because he's trying to actually stop a war that's been waged against us for decades. But they're just using drugs and the movement of people to do the invasion, rather than what we're used to seeing in history of military clashes. So I'm all for this. It's being done within the bounds of the Constitution, and for very good reason.
So to your point, Colonel, that a significant number of Americans have been killed, War Secretary Hegseth reiterated on X that these narco-terrorists will be treated the same as Al-Qaeda. So what is the significance of this? Is this a major shift in how drug traffickers are viewed?
Well, it is a major shift, because they're actually treating them as the way they should be treated, because that's how they treat their own and the people who get in their way. If you were to see the kind of violence that the cartels perpetrate on people across the southern border, where I've lived before, by the way, and seen it, it doesn't look any different than the way ISIS treats people either. It is sheer terrorism. It is perpetrated on people. It's murder on a mass scale for the purposes of profit and power and the usual motives. And so, frankly, the fact that some of these nations are trying to say, or trying to call us out for doing this, is proof that they're comfortable with it. They should be happy that we're doing this. Mexico being one of them. The cartels control way too much of the Mexican government. This is a way to start curtailing this, not necessarily directly in Mexico yet per se, but by reducing or hitting the supply chain. And this is a great way to do it. Hopefully the message keeps getting bigger and more effective.
So if these drug traffickers, as you say, should be treated like this, then on a practical level, what could treating traffickers like foreign terrorist organizations mean for law enforcement that deal with them on the ground?
It gives them more legal stance to be able to address this through what it is, which is terrorism. It activates capabilities within both state, local, and federal government assets that would be used against any other terrorist organization inside our borders, or seeking to get into our nation. It gives them far more power to leverage against them than they had before. And that's a good thing. We need to go all out on reducing this, because what you've got is cartels and Chinese and other communist organizations' influence is trying to poison America and spread out the number of deaths to make it not look as bad as it is. But again, over 400,000 casualties just due to fentanyl alone that we know of. I'm sure that number is much higher than that. And if that happened on like an almost immediate basis, do a foreign army invasion into the United States, there's no way we'd stand for it. So we shouldn't stand for it now. And this just gives greater powers to those organizations to be able to do so.
So, Colonel, could you put this into perspective for us? What is the effectiveness of military strikes on drug boats to stop drug flow compared to normal law enforcement methods? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. One of the key things is that you can interdict it before it gets here. When you're dealing with local and state level law enforcement, there's a certain point at which they can't go beyond, because you start reaching into the areas where, one, they're not logistically able to do so, or they're outside of the bounds of the scope of the law within their state and local jurisdictions. But rather than deal with the drugs as they're already on the shore and hope you can find them after they disappeared into wherever inside the United States, we can, one, eliminate them on the high seas before they even get here, two, use these videos as a deterrent against those who keep coming, and three, show the effectiveness of the intelligence we're getting to try to deter them and reduce the supply. You can't get rid of all demand and you can't get rid of all supply, but you can hurt both sides. Keep working on the demand the best we can here, but destroy as much of the supply as you can and take as much of the profit out of it as you can, and that will only help.
So, Colonel, earlier you said that legally speaking, what the U.S. is doing right now complies with the law. But can you speak to the kind of intelligence that is gathered or needed before actually taking lethal action?
Yeah, this would, in the military, you would call this standard targeting, basically, creating targeting packages based on intelligence. We would call this also intelligence-driven operations. So whether it be the CIA, the DEA, or any other federal or other agency that can come in and confirm that a certain submarine or a certain ship or a certain plane is carrying drugs by normal means of how intelligence works, and I can't get into all of that. Once you confirm it, and you know it's therefore a cartel that's moving narco-terror or moving drugs into the United States, at that point, it just takes on what the military would call standard targeting methods. And again, that leads to these kinds of lethal strikes, which hopefully leads to deterrence and destruction of the material and removing the profit motive as much as we can.
So you speak of deterrence. What is the message being sent here through these operations?
Stop sending your ships or we'll sink them. Stop sending your planes or we'll blow them out of the skies. And make it very simple, because the only thing they're going to truly understand is a combination of force and loss of profits. You do those two things, and you're going to start affecting the supply. And that can only be good for Americans because we're tired of them poisoning us.
So I'm not exactly certain on the cost of these operations, but in your view, is this a sustainable way to fight narcotics trafficking?
At the current pace, yes, absolutely it is. And in fact, it's worth the investment. There's so much our government spends money on that's not worth doing, and which is, by the way, part of the reason why we're in a shutdown right now. All of that money that specifically the Democrats and maybe some others are arguing for when it comes to giving health care funds to illegal aliens. Imagine if we could turn that into an actual protection of the American homelands from cartels and other terrorists. Either way, though, because you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of American lives already lost and their desire to continue peddling these drugs in America, you could be dealing with hundreds of thousands more in the future lost. It's worth the investment to protect our homelands, because if you don't have borders, you don't have a country.
Okay, Colonel, just one last question. Do you see these operations being effective in the long run in terms of preventing drug flow?
Well, it won't be perfect, and it can't be perfect. There's too many ways to do it. But every piece you take off the chessboard is only an advantage. The challenge will be the fact that most of these drug facilities down in places like Venezuela and Colombia, where they're actually government-backed, sanctioned in some ways, and protected, they're hard to find, hard to target, and now you're dealing with a target inside a sovereign nation. So that's going to be the challenge to truly make this the most effective you can, is how do you do that without declaring war on a foreign nation through Congress? You may not be able to, but for now, this will continue to be effective because they're just going to keep taking these pieces off the board as often as they can. And that's a good way to start.
Well, okay, Colonel, it's always great to speak with you. Thank you very much today.
Thanks, Tom.
The race for a New Jersey governor is nearing the end. While not as popular as New York City's mayoral race, it's been getting quite dramatic, though. NTD's Sean Marshall has more on the story.
The New Jersey governor race is heating up, with Democrat Micah Sherrill, the Navy veteran turned assistant U.S. attorney and U.S. representative, who's looking to reverse recent political trends and become New Jersey's next governor. On the Republican side, New Jersey businessman turned Republican state legislator Jack Ciattarelli is hoping his third bid to become state governor is the charm. In a similarity to New York City Democratic mayoral candidate Mamdani, Sherrill has been using the cost of living as an issue of focus.
Cost of living is such a huge issue. It's always important, but right now it's become at the breaking point. I'm hearing things from people that I haven't heard before, things like, I can't breathe, I can't get my head above water. And so one of the critical issues is these electricity bills. The rate hikes have really gone through the roof, and it was foreseeable.
And Ciattarelli has also been hitting the pain points of the people, similar to the New York City Republican mayoral candidates, like crime and questioning abilities to find economic solutions.
She has shown a real lack of understanding for the issues, and even when she's asked, she can't provide an explanation or a solution for things like property taxes. Electricity rates are sky high right now. We have a public safety crisis across the state. Nonviolent crime has spiked.
New Jersey is one of only 2 states, along with Virginia, that hold gubernatorial contests the year after a presidential election. And Trump's whirlwind first 4 months made him the central character in both the Republican and Democratic campaigns.
The president says he's going to terminate the Gateway Tunnel, the biggest program of national significance. If he cancels, if he is able to freeze that money, we could be paying $1 million a day.
While mentioning working along with Trump, Chitterelli has been targeting his opponent, Cheryl.
I think she cracked. I think she cracked the pressure of the world now knowing that she was punished at the Naval Academy. She wasn't allowed to walk in the graduation.
Well, this seems to be now the playbook of Republicans, is just looking to attack anyone who served.
Polling is showing a tight race down to the final stretch.
How are we feeling going down the wire here?
Really good. The energy across the state is great. The reception of minority communities has been very, very warm and positive. And when Democratic mayors are endorsing the Republican nominee, it tells you how badly people want change.
New Jersey has swung back and forth from Republican to Democratic governors for decades. A Democratic victory in November would be the first time either party won 3 consecutive New Jersey gubernatorial races in more than 60 years. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Election Day 2025 is coming up in just 1 week. NTD's Steve Lance and Tiffany Meyer will bring you our live special coverage of all the biggest races, from New York's mayoral election to the governor races in New Jersey and Virginia. Tune in on Tuesday, November 4th at 7 p.m. to get the latest election results with live analysis from our data reporters and our on-the-ground teams. That's Tuesday, November 4th, starting 7 p.m. only on NTD. Don't miss it. Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica as a Category 5 storm earlier this afternoon. Wind speed is up to 185 miles per hour. The director of the National Hurricane Center gave an update earlier today. He said it will bring catastrophic winds, flash flooding, and storm surge in the next several hours.
Very dangerous scenarios now starting to play out in the next few hours. Wind gusts over 200 miles per hour in some of those high mountains here along the south coast. Everybody in Jamaica needs to be in their safe place. Stay indoors.
The island nation hasn't taken a direct hit from a hurricane in over a decade, and never from one stronger than Category 4 in recorded history. The National Hurricane Center expects the storm to cross eastern Cuba after hitting Jamaica and move over to the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos by tomorrow. More than 40,000 customers in Jamaica are currently without power as of this morning. The hurricane is expected to stay well offshore of the United States, bringing only rough surf and minor coastal flooding to the East Coast. And Amazon will reduce its corporate workforce by about 14,000 people. Today's announcement marks a major shakeup driven in part by advances in artificial intelligence. Tech companies are increasingly using the technology to write code for their software. They're also adopting AI to automate routine tasks to save costs and cut reliance on people. Amazon had about 1.5 million full-time and part-time employees at the end of last year. Its corporate workforce includes roughly 350,000 employees. Over the last 2 years, the company has been cutting jobs across divisions, including books, devices, and its Wondery podcast business. The company said it will also offer most affected workers 90 days to look for a new role internally and prioritize those candidates. The dream of flying cars may finally be taking shape, not in a sci-fi movie, but in Silicon Valley. A California startup says it's ready to deliver the world's first street-legal flying car. Leaf Aeronautics founder and CEO Jim Dunkovin spoke with Epoch Times about turning fiction into flight. Here's that story.
For Jim Duchovny, the dream of flight began long before Aleph Aeronautics took off. Duchovny says he and Aleph's co-founders grew up reading science fiction. The works of Jules Verne, Isaac Asimov, and Ray Bradbury loomed large in their minds. But they were also inspired by some very real science. Duchovny says all their fathers were engineers or scientists,
So the inspiration is actually taking a science fiction, taking something which is fictional and made up, and marrying it with the hard science.
Duchovny launched Aleph Aeronautics in 2015, the same year Marty McFly and Doc Brown visit in Back to the Future Part 2, flying their famous DeLorean. Duchovny calls that coincidence fitting, saying 2015 was the year that multiple technologies finally caught up with the dream.
Around 2015, multiple technology matured. Without any of them, that would not be possible. First and foremost, it's a battery technology, electric battery technology, right? Rapid prototyping, composite materials, especially software. It's a lot of drone technologies, microprocessing.
The company's first model, called the Model A, looks like a sleek electric car, but hides 8 propellers for vertical lift. Duchovny says that makes it different from so-called flying taxis.
It's automotive, uses automotive infrastructure, uses automotive business model. So it is the car which can also fly. It's not an airplane with wheels which can drive.
Duchovny says safety is at the heart of Aleph's design. The vehicle includes multiple redundant systems, autonomous features, and even a full-body parachute.
To us, safety is not number one. To us, safety is number 0. The only reason we're going to be successful or not successful is safety.
If everything goes right, Aleph plans to start production on its first consumer flying cars by late 2025 or early 2026. Prices will start around $300,000, though Duchovny says later models could drop below $30,000 as production scales up.
We're not making the cars for the rich, otherwise it doesn't solve the initial problem. The problem of traffic on the ground, it's not going to be solved only if people who can afford $300,000 cars would be in the air.
Reservations are open. For $150, you can join the waitlist or pay more for priority delivery. Duchovny says early buyers help fund the technology that could save everyone time.
I don't know how much you and I or anybody in this room is going to live, 80 years, 100 years or so. 1 year of that life, you're going to spend in traffic, standing there. If we can give it back to people, that's going to impact people's lives.
Aleph Aeronautics is still seeking investors as it moves toward production. But if the company stays on track, the world's first flying car could lift off in the not-too-distant future.